Hello, welcome back here in the CAYDEN'S Weather Center. Right now, today is November 13th, 2024. We're paying attention here into Invest 99L that is continuing on over here in the Central Caribbean. This is all of Invest 99L. Very, very large system right here. Doesn't have a name yet, but could possibly become, and most likely will become future Hurricane Sarah. And, usually you probably hear hurricane and you're like, but it's November. Well, we still have the hurricane season until November 30th, but obviously we don't usually see hurricanes in November, but this one is sitting in some very favorable environment here. No dry air, not a lot of shear is in its way. There's little to no shear, and then the very, very warm water still continue in the Western Caribbean. The big question is when does the National Hurricane Center kind of issue advisories for the storm as it continues, and will possibly impact here parts of Central America. We'll talk about what the models are saying here pretty shortly and kind of see on who could get the worst of it and all of that. Let's take a look here first, though, at the water temperatures, because obviously when you take a look at when we were tracking Helene or Debbie or Milton, we saw the sea surface temperatures really, really warm over here in the Gulf of Mexico, and now obviously they are cooling down, and you kind of can see that obviously still in the North Atlantic they're cooling down. It's that time of year where they start to cool down, but then you kind of look down here in the Caribbean, not really cooling down at all, still up into that 30 degrees Celsius and 29 degrees Celsius. Very, very hot waters are continuing, and then we see some storms usually get pulled kind of like this in November due to cold fronts coming down, but every time a cold front comes down, the temperatures go down a little bit more here, especially when it hits the coast. 24 degrees Celsius over here in the Florida Panhandle, 25 just off the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and possibly even even Louisiana, and possibly even colder here kind of near the Louisiana coast where New Orleans is. So the green color obviously is not going to be the best energy for a hurricane, which is good news. But still that Caribbean is still very, very hot. That gives the opportunity for any large hurricane to form in this area right here, especially when there's no shear either. You do take a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is kind of what we're looking at here still, above average, in the Gulf of Mexico, especially when it comes to off these coasts here of the United States. I mean, this is something that, obviously we won't say Texas or Louisiana or Mississippi or Alabama is going to get hit from the storm, but you can see those waters are way above average on where they're supposed to be at this time of year. According to 1981 to 2010, that's kind of what we're taking a look at. It's above average right now, and obviously we're seeing that a lot more with these hurricane seasons going into late November. We can clearly see that the Caribbean is also above average, and that will just give more fuel, obviously, for development here with this storm. Taking a look here from the National Hurricane Center, we actually just got the brand new advisory out now here. A 90% chance of formation here. If my mouse wants to stay where it's supposed to be, there we go. An Air Force Hurricane Hunter aircraft is scheduled to investigate the system tomorrow morning. The environmental conditions are conducive for development, and a tropical depression is likely to form in the next day or two as it moves slowly westward into the Western Caribbean. After further development is likely while the disturbance meanders over the Western Caribbean Sea through the weekend, the system is expected to turn slowly northwestward by early next week. Interest across the Western and Northwestern Caribbean. And if you live in Central America and anything like that, make sure to be paying attention to this tropical system here. And it does say, regardless of the development, we could be still seeing some heavy rains are expected for Jamaica and the Cayman Islands during the next day or so. For more information on the system, obviously, make sure to keep an eye out on the National Hurricane Center and all of their updates here as they continue to update this. So this is obviously Invest 99L. The next 7 days, this is where it's supposed to possibly form here. We have that spaghetti models out. We'll talk about that here shortly. But you could clearly kind of see this is kind of just off the coast of Jamaica, so that's probably bringing a lot of that rain off to the Jamaica, and then the Cayman Islands could get possibly impacted as well. But did say it's going to mender over here in the Caribbean for a couple of days, and we'll talk about that on why we think that, obviously, because of what the models are anticipating, and why is it expected to kind of just mender in the Caribbean. So taking a look here at the spaghetti model, this is a big thing that we want to pay attention to, obviously, very, very closely here. Still looking at the 12Z spaghetti models, we can clearly see majority of the models very, very still spread out kind of on where it's going to be heading out, and you kind of can see that around the 36-hour, or not the 36-hour range, the 12-hour range, still very split on where it could, potentially be here, and that obviously is not the best agreement. But When you see it possibly go into Central America and then get possibly pulled up here into Florida, we still can see something between over here and over here with these models. So still very uncertainty exactly on where it could be heading. West coast of Florida definitely needs to be on the lookout just in case, because no matter what, majority of these models are bringing it into Florida. And, you know, the chances of it hitting Florida is very, very likely due to a cold front kind of coming down. And that's going to obviously carry our storm out. The big question is all about the timing and how strong this storm could be as well, and how big of an impact it can put on Florida. But this isn't just Florida. We can see obviously, you know, the Central America coast could definitely get hit very, very strong. The Yucatan Peninsula could get hit very strong right here, and you can see majority of those models pretty, you know, aligned on where it could possibly go, and then it starts to split out once again. So there's a little couple areas it does split a lot more right here. That's where we're kind of seeing that little bit more of a uncertainty in these areas right there. But let's say the National Hurricane Center chose to issue advisories for this later this evening, we would see this cone only go until about right here because of how slow the storm is moving. This isn't a fast-moving storm. This is going to be just kind of sitting there, and it's going to be very, very slow, and that is due to, obviously, the big ridge that is kind of building up over here in the central United States. We'll talk about that here shortly. Let's take a look here at the Euro probabilities here for a tropical depression. You can obviously see, you know, pretty good, you know, chances here of a tropical depression still continuing. You kind of can see, you know, if you follow the center part, brings it over into Central America, but not by too much. And if you do live in Florida and you're watching this storm, obviously, depending on how much it goes into Central America, could really depend on how strong, you know, how strong the storm could be. If it doesn't hit Central America, you know, enough where it weakens the system, we could be seeing a possible big system for Florida. If it does go kind of inland here, we could see a little bit more of a weaker system for Florida. But taking it over here, 168, 216 hours, you can see obviously the Florida Peninsula still in that higher chances here, and that will continue to grow up. 55% chance here for a tropical depression, still growing in that. Taking a look here at the Euro kind of ensembles here, we're taking a look at this. We can clearly see over here in the next 24 hours, seeing some models starting to pick up on possible tropical depression. The next 48 hours, that's when we're starting to see a little bit more of a tropical storm here, and that's probably when we'll see it form. Then we can see over 120 hours still hanging out down here in the Caribbean, 7 days. You know, it does seem like in about 132 hours, 6 days from now, from the last model run, that's when we start to see that turn and pull up to the north. The big question is, where in the west coast of Florida does this storm possibly go to? Taking a look at this, 7.5 days out, then it starts to go a little quicker. It goes pretty fast once it makes its way and kind of gets picked up by the front. The big question is where is that front obviously going to be located? Majority of those models are bringing it just south of the Tampa Bay and kind of just north here of the Naples area. So kind of a lot of those models are still kind of down here in south central Florida, but that's something to still pay attention to, you know, because we did have Milton that kind of went into the Bradenton, Sarasota area. But, you know, even though we have majority of these models over here, and that's obviously something to pay attention to when you live there, you know, the Florida Panhandle should not be caught off guard either, because we could still be seeing, you know, possible tropical system conditions if these models are right. So obviously there's some big changes that could still happen here in the next couple model runs. And obviously we'll be getting the 12Z European spaghettis pretty soon here. Taking a look here at the GFS ensembles, though, these are the 6Z ensembles. You can clearly see majority of these, though, taken more into a little bit more of a southern approach than the European. Still kind of more in that area right here where we could be expecting that possible landfall. So the GFS ensembles and the European ensembles kind of really agreeing with each other here. But obviously is something to look at, because what are we seeing with the trends? You know, we're seeing a lot more different trends. This is the 12Z, and you kind of can see it a little bit more differently, a little bit more backed off on the ensembles here, but a little bit more even south here for this storm. So, you know, obviously the big question is where does the storm go? We are too far out to even know exactly on where it's going to go. And, you know, we, you know, had a little bit of trouble with other models or, you know, other tropical systems on where it could go. So take a look at the 12Z GFS right here. You can clearly see here on November 15th. So in 2 days from now, we can see a possible Category 1 hurricane right now off the coast of Central America. We'll kind of just head inland there. start to die down and really just gets picked up by that front as nothing here. Maybe a small tropical depression, tropical storm, but bringing that heavy rainfall into Florida, just adding on to that cold front there with the rainfall. So it could bring that heavy rainfall into south central Florida there, but you can clearly see the reason why it's going to be sitting here. November 15th, there's that big ridge. It's kind of built in, and that's why it's not going to get pulled to the north. That's just going to keep the storm sitting there in the south. And then, according to the GFS, you keep and move on it. This is, it's finally going to find its breakthrough here. This is moving off to the east here. There's that front that's going to be starting to come down. This is where it's going to get that time to possibly get pulled to the northeast here. But the GFS, if you take a look at their latest, or, their 6Z, the last model run, very different. You can see this storm just blows up in the Western Caribbean. Still, once again, that high pressure a little bit stronger than the newer run here. And then gets picked up and gets pulled into the Keys and takes a very hard, sharp right turn because of that front kind of just carrying it and pushing it to the right. So a very, big question still continue on right there. You take a look here at the European 00Z model. You can see it stays in the Western Caribbean for a little bit of time. Still, hangs out there. There's that high pressure that we're paying attention to that's blocking it in. And then that will eventually move off and, it will find a breakthrough, heads into the Yucatan Peninsula, and then heads into central Florida. So kind of around the maybe the Venice area. That could be bringing the Euro right there, and obviously depends. If the cold front's right here, it could go a little bit more to the north. And obviously, stronger storms do tend to go a little bit more to the north, so we will have to see. It all depends on the timing, the intensity, but really mostly that timing on when that cold front does come down. The Euro AI has been pretty consistent here on keeping it a very, very weaker system here, bringing it more off to the west. And then does bringing it here into just kind of merges itself with the frontal line and then heads into the Florida Panhandle. Now, obviously, this is a big scenario. The Euro AI did not do good with Raphael, but it's still on the table that it could possibly happen like this. So obviously anywhere in Florida you need to be looking out, just because the Euro AI is the outlier right now. But the CMC and the Icon are actually starting to agree with the Euro AI. So big changes are, still expected to happen. Even though we're very far, we're still very far out, we're going to see a lot of these big changes. Taking a look here at the Euro ensembles here of this morning, these model runs right here. Obviously, tropical development likely here in the Caribbean. We're going to see that, but most of those models do seem to bring it kind of in this region right here into Florida. South Central Florida, maybe Central Florida. So something big to pay attention to if you live in Central Florida, especially after Milton. Take a look here at the GFS ensembles. Really just hangs out in the Caribbean as well. A little bit more obviously off to the south. As you can see here, South Central Florida as well, but a little bit more off to the south than the European model here. And really, the European has had that more south, for the last couple days, has had that more of a south, bias compared to the GFS, a little bit more off to the north. But let's see if we're seeing maybe a trend. This could just be a big change here for the GFS. Might just be having a bad model run here because, this storm is starting to spinning. It's starting to look a better organized. And, the good news is we'll have a plane investigating it tomorrow morning. And that will give us, a little bit more of an idea here, especially with the spaghetti models. And really, these model runs, it will give a little bit more of an idea and kind of help us on the consistency and what trends are we going to be looking for and what can we see with difference in the models. Could we see a big shift? Can we see them change? But right now, 99% of the chance this storm is going to be a hurricane in the Caribbean, and the bigger chances is we're going to see a possible Florida landfall. Obviously Florida has had, this will be their 4th landfall this year, and that's a lot for Florida, especially with all the rainfall we've already, seen in Florida. It's been a pretty big year for the state of Florida, but obviously we got to stay updated and, because hurricane season does not end until November 30th. So make sure to follow the National Hurricane Center as well. Make sure if you want to look at any of these model runs, make sure to check out Tropical Tidbits here, but make sure to leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I will try to answer them as best as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and bye-bye.